So today we're going to talk about how to save for your kids' education. And so none of the stuff in here is a recommendation by us because we don't know your personal situation. It's a disclaimer we have to go through. We don't know your individual needs, your financial situation, and we believe everything in here is accurate as of the date we researched it. So first we're going to talk about some interesting education stats. Then we're going to talk about costs at popular universities in the US and maybe the top 5 in Texas. Don't worry, James, we'll put U of H on here.
All right.
And then we're going to talk about our opinion on future costs. And we're going to talk about some savings, aid, and debt stats. And then I'm going to go into detail on the FAFSA formula, just quickly talk about that. That's the free application for financial student aid, for federal student aid, I mean. And we'll talk about, and then we're going to talk about 5 different ways you can save for your kids' education and how they interact with FAFSA and which ones I think are the best ways to save. So this first education stat, this just shows the percentage of people that actually go to college. 32% of people actually make it through college and get a bachelor's degree, and only 1.8% get a doctorate degree. I found this picture of you know who that kid is, James?
No.
You know? That's actually Ralph Herkowitz is his name. He's the youngest kid ever to graduate from Harvard. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
No, actually, I don't know who that is. I just found his picture online. That's nobody famous. Okay, so on this next slide shows kind of the average annual earnings by your highest degree earned. So if you're a high school grad, the U.S. Census Bureau says you're going to earn on average 34 grand. Bachelor's degree, 62, and if you get anything over a bachelor's, it's up to 88. So that's kind of this kind of shows you the reason why you might want to send your kid to college. We all know the reasons why, but this really tells you the earnings power that you can get by getting a degree.
Is this over your lifetime or initially out of college?
This is the Census Bureau. So they just looked at everybody, in the U.S. in 2014, and they said this is what the average people earned if they had a degree. And so this next slide, so a lot of times when you're looking at educational costs, people will just try to terrify you. They're just going to show you like how much education has increased, which it's been a lot. So this shows since 1978, tuition and fees are by far out of these consumer prices that we're looking at here, medical care, shelters, just to see general inflation and food. Tuition is by far, but this is kind of how they scare you, that 1,225%. That sounds astronomical, and it is. But so I put over here the more how we can think of it in annual terms. That's a 7.2% increase a year, whereas all the other ones are 5.3. Inflation was 2.9. It's still a huge increase. Don't get me wrong, but we should kind of think of it in more annual terms. And so this is what it costs to go to a 4 years, get a bachelor degree at these different universities. So currently at A&M, it costs you in-state tuition, and these are in no particular order. A&M is at the top. No particular. I went to A&M. Sorry. So the top one, $50,000 for the education, and then $33,000 for housing and meals. So there are obviously ways you can cut back on the housing and meals. If you commute from your parents or get a roommate and stuff like that.
U of H costs more, huh? That's good.
Yeah, no, that's true. And you also can see I also put over there, because of that, I also put over here the national universities ranking by U.S. News and World, just in case you're curious.
I think your rankings are off.
Right. But no, so
Like your college football rankings.
the biggest thing I was surprised of is the cost to go to Rice. I knew it was expensive, but I did not know it would cost you over $50,000 a year to go to Rice, basically. It's more than Harvard, more than Princeton. The only one that's kind of less than is New York and USC, which those of course have higher housing and meals. That's where the increase on those comes. So as you can see, that's a lot of money we're trying to plan for. And then you can see the out-of-state charges too that these universities will charge you if you're an out-of-state resident. So like if your kid wanted to go to Florida, you might try to convince them, no, you're gonna pay an extra 90 grand to go there, where if you stayed in state, you'd you might save a little money. So now we're going to talk about our opinion on where costs might go in 10 years. So a big reason for the increase, dramatic increase, the 7.2% annual increase in tuition, is that states have paid less and less for public universities over time. The black line here shows the state funding at four-year colleges. So you can see as state funding goes down, of course tuition has to go up. So my thought is, over the next 20 years, there's a ceiling on how little the states can pay, right? They can't go below zero, and they're probably not going to hit zero. So it's my opinion that we're not going to see as quick as the 7.2% increase as we have. Now, it still might be 4 or 5%, but that's a big difference from 7. So that kind of influences my opinion on this next page. This shows, just like I talked about, decreases in state funding are the reason for some portion of that 7.2 annual increase over the past 35 years. And actually in the last 5 years, you can see tuition has increased at a lower pace. The table here shows tuition and inflation over different time periods. And over the last 5 years, it's only increased by 4.2%. And it's coming closer in line, that variance column, it's closer to inflation than it has been in the past. So I expect over the next 10 years for it to increase at an annual rate of 4%. If you look out on the internet and stuff, a lot of people like savingforcollege.com, they'll say 5 or 6%. I think it's going to be closer to 4%, which is still way above inflation of 2% is what I expect for the long term. So the next page shows, in 10 years, if my opinion was correct, how costs would look in 4 years at the same institutions. So on this, I increased the in-state education column by 4% and the housing and meals column by 3%. So you can see that Texas A&M would be 119 grand, up from 84. Houston from 100 to 142. These are still some big numbers, even though I don't expect as high tuition increases. These are still big numbers that we're going to have to prepare for in the next 10 years. And so now we're going to go into some savings, aid, and debt stats. 59% of all parents express some degree of trepidation when saving for college, but only half actually do save. Less than half save. 48% of families save. And a lot of people think that they're going to get, grants and scholarships to help pay. In the case, that's not the case. Only 0.3% of college students get enough grants and scholarships to pay for their entire college costs. And of those people that receive grants, only less than half of everybody receives a grant or scholarship. And the people that receive grants, they only receive 7 grand. And the people that receive scholarships, they get about 9 grand. It's not even close to covering some of those figures we talked about. So what fills in the gap is going to be debt and your savings, right? So some debt facts. 7 out of 10 students in 2015 graduated with student loan debt, and they owed $35,000 per student. And this is a scary one, 65% of parents expect to support their children for 5 years after graduation. So now we're going to get into, before we get into the best ways to save, we need to talk about the financial aid formula, because it's important. You don't want how you're saving to impact your financial aid and your chance of getting some help from aid. So the FAFSA formula is simply the total cost of college per year, so those tuition stats we looked at, minus the expected family contribution, and we'll go into more detail on that in the next page, and that equals your financial aid eligibility. I mean, that's pretty simple, it makes sense. Your total cost of college minus what you can provide is what you're eligible for. And so the expected family contribution formula is they count parents' income. They count about a quarter to a half of the parents' income above a protected amount. Now it's a big range there because it depends on how many people you have in your family, you know, your income range. So let's just think of it as a quarter to half of your income is going to be counted in that formula. And so you want a low number here. You're trying to make this this expected family contribution as low as possible, so you can qualify for more aid. So then they count parent assets, and this is important. They only count up to 5.64% of non-retirement assets, and that includes 529 plans, investments, and savings. So we're trying to make our assets go towards counting as parent assets instead of students' assets down below. Because for student income, they count 50% of your income above a 2016 number of 6,400, and they count 20% of all of the students' assets. So you can see they count a very higher, almost 4 times the amount of assets are counted if they're student assets. So you want to kind of have all your savings vehicles qualify as parental assets or grandparent assets. We'll talk a little bit about that later. So this next slide shows the way people save today. 31% save towards a 529 plan, 26% just have it sitting in savings, 16% have it in investments, and then the other 3 we'll talk about as well. So the big thing to me is that over a quarter of people are saving by just leaving it in CDs or general savings, which of course we all know savings rates today are less than 1% generally. That's hardly going to keep up with the rising cost of tuition. So I did a little opportunity cost showing the cost of leaving it in savings. So I just did a very general portfolio and said, you know, if you start out with 70% in equity and each year you made it more conservative, so the blue line is your stocks, and it gets more conservative because you're getting less stocks as you get closer to your goal in 10 years, and you have more bonds and cash. So at the end you flipped it and you have 25% stocks and 75% cash and bonds, which is less risky according to history. And so if you invest in that profile on the left versus the second portfolio, which would be 100% cash, and we even gave the cash a 1.16 annualized return because that's what it's been over the last 10 years if you had been in a savings account. It's only, you know, in the last 5 years where it's dipped below 1%. So if you did that and you had a goal of raising 100 grand in 10 years, you would need, with the first portfolio, you need to save $626 per month. And you would have saved over 10 years, 75,000 bucks, and you would have had earnings of 25 grand. And if you just had all the money up front and you wanted to invest it, you'd need $55,000 today if you didn't want to do the whole monthly thing. In the second portfolio, you would have needed to invest in another, basically 150 bucks per month. You need $786 per month. And then you'd have saved $94,000 and you've only earned 6,000 bucks over 10 years. Conversely, if you had just left it at 626, this is what the chart shows on the right. You'd the red bar, you'd end up 20 grand short. And so, if you wanted to do the whole upfront thing again with the second portfolio, just leave it in cash, you'd need 89 grand today. So that kind of shows the difference. 55 grand with the first one, 89 grand with the second one. So now we'll talk about the 5 different ways to save. The first one, and which is going to turn out to be the best one, is 529 plans. So these are tax-free if you use them for qualified education expenses, and that's pretty liberal. You can use them for housing and food, room and board. And the account owner controls the stuff, so you don't have to give control over to the beneficiary. And you can easily, so if let's say you get down the road and you're the lucky 0.3%, which gets, you know, enough aid and scholarships to pay for their entire education, you can switch it to another family member really quickly, really easily. And these are just a list of the people you can change it to. So that's an easy way to switch. Now, of course, the problem is, you know, if you don't have another kid, or if you don't like your sister's kids because they're brats, you know, you might not want to switch it to them. But that's an easy way to get out if you've saved too much. Or because if you don't, you're going to pay a 10% penalty if you don't use it for education.
So if you take it out, you pay 10%?
Right.
Tax?
Yep. 10% tax in addition to the tax you would owe on the earnings anyways.
So you have to pay tax on earnings.
Right.
Would it be 35%?
Whatever your ordinary income, or depending on when you took it out, it could be capital
So
gains.
it's not, it is a capital gains tax.
If you held it for more than a year, yeah. Plus the 10% penalty. So it makes it pretty high. So there's no income limits on contributions. Anyone can contribute, and there are high contribution maximums. A lot of times you can so the 529 plans will say once you hit, a lot of them are like 400 grand. So once you hit 400,000, no more contributions. If we are lucky enough to get to that, that's a problem that I'm fine with, right? The problem with 529 plans is there's a high variability between different state plans. Now you can choose a plan that's in another state. You don't have to go with the Texas plan, and you can use it to go to a Texas school. So the really thing you need to focus on is costs. There's very big differences between costs. Texas has one of the worst plans actually in the nation. And how do 529 plans count towards FAFSA? They're parental assets. So only 5.64% of them are in that formula. So it's low. So you're going to have it's not going to impact your financial aid as much as some of these other ways will. So this is really the gold standard for me of saving is 529 plans.
So is there any benefit to having an in-state plan?
Some states, Texas does not. Some states will say if you are under certain incomes, they'll match your contribution, but not many states do, and it's pretty low income limits for those states that do. So, and another thing is, so you can get them through advisors. Like you can call Fidelity and say, I want to sign up for your 529 plan. There's a lot of different investment options in them. So you don't like where you're at, you can roll it to at the end I show no, it's all right. At the end I talk about what plan I recommend and why, and you can roll it over to that plan easy. The next one, and Texas has one of these, is called a prepaid tuition plan. So this is where you buy tuition units, and their phrase is pay for tomorrow's education at today's costs, at today's rates. So which is good, it's a good little slogan. The problem is, you don't really know what your kid's gonna do. You might go to a 2-year school at first. You might, they're not available for graduate school, these tuition credits. They're just not as flexible. And there is some component in there where they factor in some of that increase. So you're not truly paying for today's rates. So these are not as recommended. They're more safe, I will put it that way. You're basically paying the state to take away some of that variability with your investment gains. But if you're in a conservative target fund in the investment, you're gonna do just fine. So to me, a prepaid tuition is not as good as the 529 plan. With a Coverdell ESA, so these are good if you wanted to use the cost for paying for other education, not just college. You can use these for kindergarten through college. So like if you were sending your kid to private school, this would be a good investment vehicle. The problem is you can only contribute $2,000 a year per beneficiary from all sources. So if your grandparents want to help you out, they're doing $1,000, that means you can only do $1,000. And you have to earn less than $110,000 single and $220,000 if you're married. And you must contribute until you turn you can't contribute after your kid turns 18, and you have to use the funds by age 30. With a 529, you can keep rolling them to another beneficiary, until there's no deadline on when you have to use them. There are wider investment options. 529s are state ran plans, so there's a limited investment choices. But most of the time, those are more than appropriate. And they're just like with 529s, these have low financial aid impact if they're owned by the parents. They're counted as parental assets.
So these are tax-free when you're utilizing them? There's no...
Yeah, qualified education, same thing, except you can use them for more. You can use them from kindergarten through college.
And you can't use them if you make over a certain adjusted gross income. There's not like a phase out or...
Yeah, it's a lower phase out, but I just put the max.
But it's not like you can only use like 75% if you over that.
Yeah, no. So that's the limit. So it's like 100. I think it's, I don't know. I don't remember it, but it's like, so 90 or 100, it starts phasing out. So if you're at like 105, you're phased out from 75% of it. And so the next kind of accounts are custodial accounts. If we look back to the other page, 4 or 5% of people save through custodial accounts. So these have very little tax advantages. There's no maximum contributions, can't change the beneficiary. Good thing is there's no investment restrictions. And the worst thing is that the child assumes control at the age of majority, which is 18 in Texas. Now, I know if I was 18 and I had inherited a bunch of stuff, I probably wouldn't know what to do with it when I was 18 or 19. The reason people put money in custodial accounts is like a grandparent wants to ensure that their money is used these have to be used for the benefit of the child. So like if you wanted to give, little Susie, $5,000, you put them in a custodial account, and the benefit is that they have to be used for the child. You don't just giving it to the parent and saying, I trust you to use it for the kid. You know for sure they have to. So
would this be considered, if there's little tax advantages, so it's
So-
not tax-free, could you do like a gift if you're a grandparent and being exempt from taxes that way?
what do you mean?
You can have up to 4,000 or something that you can gift someone, and there's no taxes associated with that. So when this person,
Well, you can, so you can do gift tax. You can transfer money from grandparents to kids, and it's like 14,000. But you're still taxed. So if you invest that, you're going to pay tax on the gain. Whereas with the 529, you won't be taxed on the gain. And so the tax advantage I talk about is you can file a tax return for the kid, and he's allowed to exclude like up to $950 of earnings. So there is some little tax advantage, but it's not worth it, because then you also have to file a tax return. If you have to hire someone to do that, that costs money. Another way to save is U.S. savings bonds. Interest is tax-free if you buy U.S. savings bond called EE bonds or I bonds. If you're using for qualified education expenses, the interest income you earn from them are tax-free. You can only contribute $10,000 per year, so that's a low contribution maximum. And the tax benefits are phased out once you reach a pretty low income limit, $77,000 if single, $116,000 if married. Again, if they're owned by the parents, low FAFSA impact. And of course, savings bonds do not have great returns, but they're very low risk. Fixed rate of interest is currently 0.1% for the EE bond, but with EE bonds, the government will guarantee that if you hold them for 20 years, they'll double. So as long as you hold them for 20 years, you're guaranteed at least, it's roughly 3.5% return. Whereas an I bond, they don't guarantee it, but you get that same 0.1% plus inflation. So it's currently 1.64. So that's kind of, depending on what your holding period is, you might be better off doing the EE bonds if you're holding it for 20 years. If you're doing it for less than that, probably the I bond would be the better choice. So we reached my conclusions. It's never too early to start planning. 529 plans are the clear winner because of their flexibility, tax advantages, and low impact on financial aid. And not all of so I don't recommend to people that they try to fund 100% of their education through 529 plans. Because again, there's chances you might not need all of that. You might incur a penalty if you needed to use it. So I say 50 to 75% save towards 529 plans of what you want to provide. So not everyone wants to pay for 100% of their kids' education, right? Some people might want to incur some debt, or might want to have their kids help pay for it. So I'm saying of the amount you're saving for, 50 to 75% of that should go into a 529 plan. And our most recommended plan is the Utah plan because it has very low costs. They use Vanguard investments, and it's easy to set up in 15 minutes. And so I don't charge any fee. I have like 5 or 6 of my clients are saving for education, and they have an account at the Utah plan, which I help them set up. I don't charge them for anything for managing that, because you just basically set it and forget it. And the reason for that, if you look on the next page, sorry, is educational goals are typically a lot less complicated than retirement. With retirement, you're going to have 5 or 6 accounts. You're going to have different tax issues. You're going to have tax-free, tax-deferred, taxable accounts. With a 529 plan, you have 1 account saving for 1 goal. It's easy, right? So I don't charge for that. It's dumb. Like I said, you can go to an advisor and he'll charge you 0.5% a year for it. That's ridiculous to me. So my next thing is don't use an advisor to select a plan. Like I talked about with Fidelity earlier, they're going to direct you to investments that help them the most. So a comparison at the end of the Texas plan versus the Utah plan. You can go to savingforcollege.com and compare 529 plans really easily in like 5 minutes. The Texas plan has investment costs of 0.6 to 1%. That is unbelievably high. It makes it one of the worst plans in the nation. You might think our low voter turnout for some of our plans here. Whereas the Utah plan, you can see 0.16 to 0.21%, like, 1/5 of what the Texas plan has. And so then the next little thing I say is a 0.5% higher expense ratio. If we're still using that portfolio that we talked about on slide 18, it's going to save you roughly $4,000 to $5,000 over 10 years, which is not chump change. So that's it.
So if you have like grandparents and the parents are contributing to a 529 plan, would you get separate 529 plans or just contribute to the same?
You can do it either way. It's probably easier just to if the grandparents are worried about what, again, the account owner can change that beneficiary anytime they want. So like if you are contributing to, let's say our parents were contributing to a 529 plan that Christina owned. I die, we get divorced, she marries someone else, has another kid, switches beneficiary, right? So you got to think about that. That's a reason why you might want to set it up for yourself. Because then if she got divorced, because she did something horrible, I wouldn't have done anything. She would have. They could switch it then to a beneficiary that, that for if I had another kid.
Yeah. Okay.
So, make sense? That's it.